Hey, this is John Modern, and today we are talking about the 2023 Alchemy Arktos 150. So let's just jump right in. So this is Alchemy's bigger bike for the time being. It is 150 mil out back, 170 mil up front, and it's really just kind of a larger variation of their base 140. So they've got three mountain bikes in their lineup. There's a 125, there's the 140, which is kind of their trail all mountain bike, and then the 150 is kind of their bigger bike. Now you can actually buy kits, it's really just a shock and a fork, and convert each bike into the other version of the Arktos. So I could go on Alchemy's website, buy a new fork from them and shock. It's a little drop-down selection, and yeah, turn this bike into a 140 if I wanted, and that bike would, I think, have a 150 fork. So this is their bigger version. This is the XO1 drivetrain setup. All right, so let's talk about geometry. Moderately long reach. This one has a 502 mil reach on an XL. It's a little bit longer than I prefer, but these days I would say it's moderate. Some of these XLs are getting up into the 510, 515 territory and even longer for some bikes. So fairly moderate numbers there. It's got a 63.75 degree head angle, which is pretty slack, with a 170 mil fork. And the seat tube is 76 degrees, which isn't the steepest that you're seeing out there these days, but it's also relatively steep, kind of moderate. I actually don't mind because it doesn't put a ton of pressure on your palms when you're just on flatter sections of trail or just going uphill slightly. Some of these really steep seat tube angles, like 77.5, 78 degrees, while they make it really comfortable when you're climbing steep sections, on the flatter sections of trail, you're so forward that your palms start to hurt. So I actually didn't mind that this wasn't the most progressive geometry out there. 437 mil chain stays. Again, not the shortest, not the longest. I'd say maybe slightly on the shorter side. Yeah, that's about it. So that's not it. That's just the numbers I'm going over with you. There's a lot more to a bike than those figures, but those are some of the key indicators I look at. This bike is running on sine suspension, and that's named after the sine curve. Basically, the first half of the suspension travel is kind of a progressive ramp up, and then it changes to a digression where it gets, a little bit softer on the back end of that. So how that translates on the trail is really unique. It's pretty poppy, kind of when the trail is a little bit mellower, but then it kind of bails you out when the trail gets chunky. And, it can feel like a smaller bike on mellower trails, but as soon as you kind of get in over your head, it bails you out. That digressive rear, second half rather, of that travel gets really supple, really forgiving, and yeah, it's made for a really unique ride where you can kind of pop around on chill sections, but still have the confidence to charge kind of more technical sections. But first, we're going to talk about the climbing. I've been on this bike for a while. I've taken it everywhere. I've taken it to Moab. I've done every trail in the Front Range, easy, moderate to very difficult trails. And I actually took this bike to Squamish during a trip in June. So it's seen Whistler Bike Park, Alice Lake trails around Squamish. We went to Pemberton. We even took it to Seymour in the North Shore. All the Front Range stuff in Colorado, and again, Moab. So it's kind of been everywhere. The only place I haven't taken it, I haven't been to Sedona in a while, but it's seen kind of all types of use. So climbing, this is not a bike I lock out. Certainly you can. We don't have a ton of in the Pacific Northwest, I feel like you guys have long, we call them fire roads out there, you call them logging roads, right? And they're really smooth and really long. Here we kind of climb single track in the Front Range of Colorado. And it's rocky, it's often the same trail that you're coming down. I don't like lockouts for that. I like maximum traction. It's also really loose here. So, I kind of like a little bit of movement in the rear suspension for that reason. If I was somewhere where it was more of just kind of a gravel road climb or a really smooth long climb, I might consider locking it out, but I never really fussed with it. I mean, this climb lever's maybe been used once or twice. The rest of the time it was just fully open. It's a bike you feel a little bit more on top of than inside of, and that's a weird thing, but it's true. If you've had a lot of bikes, there are some bikes, I was on the Norco Optic for a while, and you feel like the front is way out there and the rear is out there, and you're kind of like down inside of this bike. And it's this really safe kind of cockpit type of feeling. And it doesn't mean it's better in all situations. It certainly is for some, but This is more of a bike that you feel a little bit more on top of. It's a little poppier and kind of encourages you to go after some technical climbing in a really fun way that maybe a bike that you're already kind of so low and down inside of doesn't encourage. Those kind of bikes, I never really feel confident to kind of charge up and pop up a rock on a climb, whereas this style bike, I definitely do. You kind of have to weight the front when you're climbing on this one. Definitely stay a little bit lower, a little bit kind of, you know, towards the front. The front wheel's kind of far out there. It's a 63.75 degree head tube angle, and then the chain stays being 437 mil. It does tend in steeper situations to kind of come up a little bit. You can correct that, you can lean forward, but it's just something to be conscious of. It's not the lightest bike. Alchemy, I think that, you know, and I've talked to the guys over there a lot about this. I think that their philosophy on bike building and quality leans towards, you know, the ride characteristic, not having the lightest bike possible, right? There's certainly companies out there that have lighter frames that I would say maybe flex or chatter or don't feel as good. This bike is on a little bit on the heavier side of things for kind of a big trail, almost enduro bike, right? But it feels so stout. It feels so smooth. It's quiet. It's stable. I never feel like when I'm jumping into some kind of chunky sections of trail that the bike's gonna flex on me, or some bikes just feel like they're gonna break underneath you, to be honest. I don't like buying this bike, but this one just feels very confident, very, again, stout. It doesn't flex a ton, and it feels great, and it also comes with a lifetime warranty. So I think they built this bike to last. It's not, you know, winning awards on the scale, but again, it's comfortable, stout, and comes with a lifetime warranty, which I think is amazing. Now we'll talk a little bit about descending. So like I was talking about earlier with the Sign suspension, it's really interesting. Again, that first ramp up, that first half of the travel is very progressive. And when the trail's not super crazy, that means you can kind of bunny hop really easily and pop around. Flow trails, it attacks that very well. And then it's digressive the second half of that travel, which when I first got on this bike and I set my sag, I thought it was too progressive. I thought that maybe I needed to go down to like 25% sag. And it just felt kind of, you know, maybe like, oh, if I get into chunkier sections of the trail, this bike's not gonna handle it and it's gonna get kind of just spit off the trail. Not the case at all. Again, because after you hit that half travel, it becomes digressive and gets a lot more forgiving. That said, you can bottom it out. It took me a little bit to kind of tune this bike and to figure out exactly what sag I needed. I ended up settling around 28%. That kept it really lively, but still kind of bailed me out without bottoming out. So again, feels like a really playful bike in a way that, you know, some of those playful bikes, once you get them into more precarious situations, they get overwhelmed really quickly. This one has this like, it's like Two-Face. It like has this second personality where it opens up, becomes very forgiving, and still encourages speed and fun. And that's what I'm looking for. I want a bike that I can fly on, go really fast, but that's also like kind of playful and poppy when the trails aren't crazy and you're not kind of turning it up to 11. So I've really liked this bike. I think that they've done that and they've approached that solution in a really unique way with the Sign suspension, all at a really good value. And we'll talk about that soon too, with a frame that has a lifetime warranty and is also just beautiful. And I know that, I think it should matter. I think you should be able to look at the bike in your garage and be like excited and always look back at it. I think that that's becoming more apparent to bike manufacturers. You know, everyone used to say, well, form over or function over form or form over function. And now it's kind of like, no, both matter, right? Like it has to look good. It has to behave well as well. It just kind of the bar is getting so high, which is great for us consumers. It's quick at changing directions. I wouldn't say this is like an all-out enduro bike. It does feel like a trail bike LT, right? Like they have a 140, which I think is what they kind of designed all their bikes around. They're 3 mountain bikes. And then this is the long-legged version of that. And it feels like that, to me, in a good way. Some enduro bikes just aren't playful or fun at all. And that's also not a bike that you could take anywhere. This bike you could take anywhere. When we're doing these really bigger rides up in the high country, big climbs at elevation, I take this bike. And because it's also going to be fun on the descent. There's often a lot of like chunky terrain up there, unpredictable, and I'd love to have my enduro bike, but I don't want to be on it all day necessarily. This is a bike I can spend all day on very comfortably. Like I said, I took it to Squamish because I knew how versatile it was, and I could kind of do anything on it and spend a lot of time on it without getting as fatigued as maybe a bigger bike. I wouldn't say this bike is park worthy. There are riders that ride for Alchemy that will take this bike and compete in free ride competitions. I'm just not that guy. I've been to the park on downhill bikes, enduro bikes, trail bikes, every kind of bikes. And this handles kind of the more moderate parts of the park and the smoother jump lines just fine. But I did find its limits at Whistler Bike Park and did find myself wishing I had a bigger bike while I was there, only at the bike park. Everything else around Squamish, BC, I felt like this was plenty of bike for at least the stuff I was riding. But I did find myself wishing I had a bigger bike at the park. It's really good in steep technical terrain. This bike has this really weird ability to pivot at a full stop better than other bikes, and I don't know why. I think maybe that progressive first half of the travel rather, of the rear end makes that, you know, a little bit easier to kind of pop that rear wheel and pivot. And that was really useful in Squamish, approaching all these slabs and then having to stop, kind of line yourself up and then go down the slabs. That part this bike did really well at. There's also this spot on the whole enchilada. I forget if it's called the notch or the snotch, but everybody knows it. You kind of come down to it, and most people have to like hand your bike to your buddy, and you kind of slide down this really steep, slick rock. And it's really hard to, if you're on your bike, to make that last turn because you have to stop and kind of pivot. And I was able to do that on this bike and got that section for the first time. So that was really cool. So again, yeah, that slacker head tube angle really favors the steep trails, but on faster, more moderate trails, I did find myself having to really be conscious to keep that front end weighted. Especially here in Colorado, sometimes, you know, it's just a moderate descent with really loose soil. That could get tricky if I wasn't weighting that front wheel too much. Otherwise, it just wants to wash out. So real quick, I want to talk about value. Value with Alchemy is kind of second to none. This bike right here, as spec'd, with factory suspension, factory dropper, I changed the wheels out, but it comes with Industry 9 wheels with torch hubs in an XO1 drivetrain. At the time this video shot, you can buy that for $54.99. This was a Santa Cruz or a Specialized. I think you're at least looking at 7,500 bucks, maybe 9 grand for kind of the same spec bike. So the value is incredible. They ship it straight to your house. If you're local here in Colorado, you can pick it up from their headquarters in Golden, Colorado, which is really useful. And their support team is amazing. You can call them up, email them. They're always there to help out. I needed to replace a little linkage bolt that I had stripped out. I didn't notice it got loose and I kept riding it. That's on me, not Alchemy. That stuff happens after riding your bike for a while. Check your bolts, torque them all back to spec. So yeah, that part's really cool. They've got a cool model. You definitely feel like that savings is passed on to you, and you get a lifetime warranty. So I don't know, unless you're like really loyal to a brand or a shop, like, man, some of the value for this style of bike is just incredible. If you haven't gathered already, we'll kind of talk about who this bike is for. To me, this bike is for somebody who has access to steep terrain, who wants one bike to do most of their riding. Everything from kind of like blue trails that are flowy and fast to kind of blue-black technical or really steep technical terrain. But maybe not somebody who loves going to the park a lot. I think there are better, more enduro style bikes from other brands. You know, this is their enduro bike, and you could certainly race an enduro, just depends on the course. And they're probably due to have won plenty of enduros on this bike. But if I was somebody going to the park a ton, there are enduro bikes from other brands that I think are more well suited, but way less versatile. Again, this is the bike I grab when I'm going to high alpine. It's the bike I grab when I'm getting on the plane flying to BC. It's just kind of been great in such a big variety of scenarios that, I don't know, I'm gonna miss it. It's been the main squeeze for a little while now. So yeah, that's who it's for. I hope this has been helpful. Again, still pretty new with all this stuff. If you have any questions at all, put them in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, do all that fun YouTube stuff. And yeah, look forward to hearing kind of your thoughts on this bike. If you've been on it or if you're looking at buying it, happy to answer questions.